I really want to thank all of the speakers for what I thought was just a fabulous discussion. The only thing that I would wish differently is that we had a lot more time to explore a lot of the issues that came up, but I think the range and breadth of issues that came up was really extraordinary, and really did represent these perspectives from multiple different perspectives. And that was really one of our goals of this workshop, was to make sure that we were not just hearing from those who have to enforce the policy, but those who have to actually implement the policy, whether you're an institution, whether you're a researcher, and whether you're a young researcher, a graduate student, or an older researcher. I think all of those perspectives were brought together. So I thought that one way to kind of reflect on the day was to share some of what I thought were some of the memorable quotes. So if we could have the next slide. There were so many I couldn't type fast enough, but there were a couple that I really thought kind of captured a lot of the themes. So one was prioritize, and I'm sorry they're not all attributed. Sometimes we didn't type fast enough, but I think we do have that in the notes. Prioritize adoption over perfection. So I think that there was a general sense that came out of the talks today that I don't think it's a big surprise to anybody that there are plenty of challenges that still remain. There's infrastructure that's almost there, but not quite there. But that there's a general framework that has been worked out through a lot of sweat and tears over the last decades as to reasonable practices for sharing data and data management in the laboratory, infrastructure for doing so in the terms of repositories, even a citation system that is there, but it's not all ready. And I think the only way we'll ever get ready is something, and this quote at the bottom, I think, is one of mine that I put in the chat. As we practice, we will learn, and the infrastructure will get better. So the idea that that there's a perfect infrastructure out there, or that all the problems with data citation or data sharing of all types has been solved, I think would be naive. We certainly heard about cases that are still extremely difficult, like very, very large data sets and certain types of data types that don't really fit into existing repositories. But I think that the basic practices and infrastructure are there, and the way that we tune them, the way that we get them better, is to actually start to adopt these practices and push the system so that it serves our needs. And that's a very sort of exciting opportunity, which is a theme I hope that we'll return to tomorrow. And along with those lines, engage now, it's more productive than waiting. So the best way to get started sometimes is just to get started. I also think that there was a theme of this idea that data itself should be elevated and made science ready. But I like this idea of data elevation, in that both the research community needs to value the data sets that they produce and treat them as a primary product of research, and the infrastructure, and that includes both our things like data citation, but promotion and tenure committees, grants, has to also recognize that these are really important products of scholarship. So that culture change, I think, involves all of us elevating data. And that goes along with, I think, the phrase that Adam made, which is that biomedical science is being datafied, so that everything now is going to be about data, and those two things go hand in hand. I love this quote that said, the most important issue of data sharing is respect, but that needs to be earned with an equal amount of generosity. So again, it's respect for the data, but also us being generous in sharing what it is that we produce, not just, I like that a quote from Carol, and it didn't make it in, of this sort of dating, right? Where we're just going on a date and I share just enough to get you interested, but not enough to really do anything fruitful. Also, we heard in the last session that this idea of data banking, which is when you're done, you put it into a data bank, and that's really not true, right? That this really needs to be data management from the get-go, but that we also want to move away from the sort of eat your Brussels sprouts type of attitude, which is do this, because it's good for you, that you should do it because you want to, because these Brussels sprouts have been made so easy and useful to you that, of course, you couldn't imagine living without them. Another theme that I think was captured in this quote, or this is really a paraphrase, is that the future you will be a major consumer of data sharing, so that the benefits are not just to some anonymous third party, but that when you take good care of your data, you derive benefits long into the future. And I like that quote from Scott Students, that data management, the goal of it is not to archive perfect data. And we did hear quite a bit about failed experiments and things, and the effort it would take to publish those. Whereas if we incorporate a culture of data management, then making that data available is routine because it's already there. And I think, again, something for us to remember is that barriers do not need to be roadblocks. that there's things that we have that are going to be difficult, but they needn't stop us. I think this point of nudge points was really important, that going from a culture of never sharing your data to always sharing your data in public may be a very large leap, but there's a lot of value in being able to share it with your lab mates and then also your colleagues into these smaller groups. And that if you can solve those problems together, then the problems of solving with the anonymous third parties, of course, become a lot easier. We did learn that only 1% of papers have associated data, so it's clear that we are in the early phases of this. And I think there were a lot of statistics that were shown that said we've still got a long way to go. But I don't think that we would be here if we were already there, in the sense that we're having this workshop, because we know we have a long way to go and that we don't need to be discouraged by that. Infiltrating the committees, promotion and tenure was a major concern. So how to start again this whole theme of elevating data by putting people on who talk to their committees about code and talk to their committees about open sharing is important. And this was just a quote that I put in there, which is what about? Because no matter how much progress has been made, we are always going to find that there are more things that we could be doing. Again, that's why we're establishing new norms, new cultures. And as I will think I repeat over and over again, it's a very exciting time when we're all being invited to participate in this. So those were some of the thoughts that I had that these quotes spurred. If we could go to the next slide. Just to make sure I don't repeat myself, but again, it was very hard to take notes and make slides while I was trying to listen to that wonderful last discussion. There was a lot of focus, I think, that we heard on long tail data and not just large prospectively shared data sets. And I thought that that was very positive, because we know that's the bulk of data. And it's oftentimes the individual researcher working in their own lab that is going to be enormously impacted by all these new requirements, because they're not part of a large project necessarily that has infrastructure and expertise at hand, and they're going to have to get it. So I thought that was very positive. I was also very happy to see that there was a lot of emphasis on impact and not just box ticking, right? We know that this new mandate can be viewed as, I have to do it, you're going to make me do it, you're going to make me eat my Brussels sprouts. But there was a lot of emphasis in the talks today on wanting to do this and why it was good for everybody down the chain, not just society at large, which we certainly saw with the examples that Patty gave in the pandemic and what the impact of open sharing of data and tools we're able to do in a public health emergency, but that you can extend that, of course, to the regular practice of science. Again, I already brought this up, that you can take a glass half full or glass half empty, that the infrastructure is not perfect, but you could also say, yeah, but we've got the beginnings of it. We have the makings of it. And as we push that and as we use it, it will get better and better. And we don't need to necessarily be flummoxed by the edge cases that will be encountered, but we do recognize that things like massively large images, for example, are going to challenge the system, and we do need to be prepared to deal with those. We saw in the question stream, and we didn't have a chance to get to all of these, but certainly costs are a major concern with the research community. And in the last panel, we addressed that a little bit in promotion and tenure. And so a strategy for dealing with that, for mitigating even though we can put those costs in, will they cover the complete amount that we need in our grants? We don't know, but again, I think the idea that we start to think about what these costs are and be able to estimate them is very important. The libraries and librarians will play a very big role in this. Oftentimes in biomedical data discussions, the librarians and the libraries are not there. We wanted to make sure they were here because, as you see, there's a lot going on there, and they will be partners in this. But as we also see, people in biomedicine don't go necessarily to their institutional repositories. They still go to the public repositories that are domain specific and run by researchers. And I do think there needs to be more interaction there. This is one of my favorite phrases, prepare to share fair, right? That we understand that data management is integral to all of this, that we want data to be born fair, as one of the other participants said. But the good thing about what we know is that this is a multi-stakeholder problem, and that no one group needs to take on the complete burden of all this. We can distribute that burden across the different groups. And I think, again, a theme that we heard over and over again is you want to act locally, but think globally, that management in the lab and small scale sharing within and across labs can be a bridge to fully open data. And finally, the human infrastructure can't be underemphasized. There's workforce issues, getting access to the expertise. a calls for professionalization of data stewardship. And I thought an idea that came up in the last session, that there are the guilds of data stewards and guilds of people who know how to do this so that we can share expenses. And of course, the important role of oversight. So now I want to turn over to Richard Nakamura for him to share his perspectives.
As usual, Maryann did a very good and comprehensive job. I'll just add a couple of points that it's important to think about data management and sharing early on and throughout the whole research process, that the entire stakeholder community is invited. Those on the meeting here are invited to participate and contribute to this effort. That is, we will be reading all of your questions and trying to think about how we can provide answers, either before this meeting is over or in some subsequent communications. There are key issues that remain to be resolved and for NIH to deal with in order to help enforce this, and that is funding, the resources needed, the incentive structure, not only for individual scientists, but for their institutions, development of training modules, how to deal with discovery science. I think we heard some very good information that discovery science should be included. Citations remain difficult. I agree with the general idea that we need to get started and that standards will accumulate as we develop more practice with this. I love the idea of tests for data reusability that can be applied in some data sets. Finally, we need to make visible PI sharing practices. And so many of you pointed out that we need to have the ability to reflect in our funding and other activities to make it less desirable for scientists to hold on to their data. Many scientists still think of data sharing as a form of tax on their system, both in terms of extra effort and extra costs. And I think we've heard today many examples of how just better science emerges in data sharing, both within a scientist's laboratory and across all of science. So I think we need to spread that news and work on this more. And tomorrow we'll hear more about, I guess we can go to the next thing. Tomorrow we'll begin at 11 a.m. on the same workshop website. The session will cover value and costs of managing and sharing data, shaping the culture of data sharing. I think shaping the culture and getting all the institutions around the culture that is preventing data sharing needs to move. And finally, implementing the NIH policy. Are we ready, and how can the Office of Science Policy work with other organizations to be ready for 2023? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for your good questions and good input today.